62 children saw something outside their school in Zimbabwe. No teacher witnessed it. No photograph captured it. No investigator reached them before they had spoken with one another and their families. Yet 3 decades later, several, now adults, still describe a silver object, a black-clad figure, and eyes that seem to look inside them. The Ariel School encounter is called one of history's strongest UFO cases, but its power does not come from 62 perfectly isolated testimonies. That version never existed. The mystery begins when we remove the exaggerations and ask, after memory, suggestion, media attention, and flawed interviews are accounted for, what remains? On Friday, September 16, 1994, students at the Ariel School near Ruwa were outside for their mid-morning break. The school stood in a semi-rural area roughly 20 kilometers from Harare, surrounded by scrub, trees, and open ground. The pupils ranged from about 6 to 12 years old and came from different racial and cultural backgrounds. The adults were inside for a staff meeting, leaving the playground without a teacher watching the children. At around 10 in the morning, attention shifted toward the rough field beyond the school boundary. Accounts differ on what appeared first. Some children described one silver object. Others saw several bright or disc-like shapes. Some said an object descended behind the trees. Not every student saw the event, and not every witness described the same sequence. But dozens began moving toward the edge of the playground, pointing into the brush. Then several of them saw a figure. In the surviving interviews, children described a small being dressed in black, with a pale or dark face and unusually large eyes. Some remembered one figure, others more than one. A few said it moved with an odd gliding motion, or appeared in one position and then another. The youngest children reached for a familiar explanation and used the word tokoloshe, a dangerous supernatural being known in Southern African folklore. Others used the language of spacecraft and aliens. They may have been looking at the same ambiguous stimulus, but culture shaped what they believed it meant. Fear spread quickly. Children ran toward the school buildings, crying and trying to get the adults' attention. The teachers had not seen the object or the figure. At first, they treated the reports as confusion or a playground story. But when the children went home, they repeated the experience to their parents. Families returned to the school, and the event could no longer be dismissed as one child trying to frighten another. The number 62 eventually became attached to the case. 62 pupils between 6 and 12 reportedly said they had witnessed at least part of the event. This did not mean 62 independent children gave identical, privately recorded statements. There were more students at the school who reported seeing nothing, and the children who did see something had hours, and then days, to speak among themselves. That fact does not prove a hoax. It means the evidence was socially exposed from the beginning. The timing matters because popular retellings often claim that investigators separated the pupils within hours, prevented them from speaking, and collected perfectly matching drawings under controlled conditions. That did not happen. BBC correspondent Tim Leach reached the school on September 19th, 3 days after the sighting, and filmed some of the early interviews. UFO researcher Cynthia Hind arrived the following day. By then, the children had spoken with classmates, teachers, parents, and journalists. Hind interviewed a limited number of pupils, sometimes in small groups while other children could listen. Her intentions may have been sincere, but the setting did not protect each memory from the influence of the others. The drawings remain haunting. Children sketched discs, domed objects, dark figures, oversized eyes, trees, and the rough field outside the playground. Several images share recognizable features. They are also not identical. Craft shapes vary. The number and placement of figures change. Some drawings are detailed, others are simple forms created by young children. Their value lies in showing what individual pupils believed they had seen, not in proving that every witness reproduced the same technical blueprint. That distinction makes the case less perfect, but more human. Watch the early footage and the children do not appear to be actors performing a polished story. They hesitate. They use their hands to show movement and distance. Some disagree over details. Their fear appears genuine, but genuine fear does not identify its cause. A child can honestly report an extraordinary experience that began with a misperception, social contagion, or a prank. Sincerity and accuracy are not the same thing. Zimbabwe was also not isolated from UFO culture. Ariel was a private school, and the claim that its pupils had virtually no exposure to television, science fiction, or Western images of aliens is too broad. More importantly, Southern Africa had experienced a wave of aerial reports only 2 nights earlier. A brilliant object crossed the sky and generated public discussion and calls to Zimbabwean radio. It was later associated with the atmospheric re-entry of Russian rocket hardware. Whatever its technical explanation, the event placed strange objects in the sky into the national conversation before the Ariel School recess. That does not explain a small figure near the brush. It does provide a psychological atmosphere in which an unusual light, reflective surface, animal, person, puppet, or rumor could be interpreted as a spacecraft encounter. The children did not need to invent a coordinated lie. They only needed to influence one another while trying to make sense of something unclear. Then John Mack entered the story. Mack was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and a Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer. He was not a foolish man wandering into a subject he had never considered. By 1994, he had already spent years interviewing people who reported alien abduction experiences, and he was increasingly open to the possibility that their accounts represented more than conventional dreams or mental illness. That background made him unusually willing to listen. It also meant he did not arrive as a neutral investigator who expected the UFO hypothesis to fail. Mack came to Zimbabwe in November, roughly 2 months after the sighting. He interviewed only a subset of the reported witnesses, not all 62. These were recorded conversations, not a clinical experiment capable of detecting lies or proving that an external craft had landed. There was no scientifically validated micro-expression test, no controlled comparison group, and no psychological procedure that could certify the children as truthful eyewitnesses to extraterrestrial beings. What Mack did offer was something the children had not received from many adults: sustained attention without ridicule. He asked them to describe the eyes, the movements, and what they felt during the encounter. Several children spoke of a disturbing emotional connection. A small number described images or impressions concerning pollution, technology, and the destruction of Earth. The ecological warning would become one of Ariel's most famous elements. The idea that the beings had bypassed language and placed a message directly into the children's minds. But this part of the account requires special caution. The environmental theme is most visible in Mack's later interviews and was not a dominant feature in the earliest reporting. Only some of the interviewed children described anything resembling telepathic communication. Mack himself had long-standing concerns about nuclear weapons, environmental destruction, and transformations in human consciousness. Critics argue that his questions and worldview may have helped shape ambiguous childhood impressions into a coherent warning about the planet. Supporters see the same interviews differently. They point to the emotional weight in the children's voices and the unusual way several returned to the eyes. The pupils were not merely repeating, "An alien spoke to me." They struggled to describe a transfer without sound, fear, sadness, images, and an awareness that humanity was damaging its world. To believers, the difficulty of expression makes the testimony feel less rehearsed. To skeptics, it shows how easily an adult can organize a child's vague feeling into a larger narrative. The interviews, therefore, preserve the mystery and contaminate it at the same time. Another myth concerns Harvard. The university did investigate Mack's professional methods, but the inquiry began in May 1994, months before the Ariel School event, and focused on his broader work with people who claimed alien abductions. It was not launched because he endorsed the Zimbabwean children, and Harvard did not certify the Ariel encounter as real. After a lengthy review, the medical school took no disciplinary action. reaffirmed his academic freedom, and urged adherence to high standards of clinical practice. The outcome protected his right to study controversial experiences. It did not validate extraterrestrial visitation. That difference is crucial because Mack's prestige is often used as a shortcut. A Harvard psychiatrist believed the children, therefore their interpretation must be correct. Credentials cannot transform testimony into physical evidence. At the same time, skepticism cannot erase testimony merely because its content is uncomfortable. Mack's most defensible conclusion was not that aliens had landed, but that the children appeared to be describing something they experienced as real and emotionally significant. No physical trail settled the question. There was no confirmed landing mark, unknown material, radiation measurement, radar track, photograph, or adult eyewitness to the figures. The field was not sealed for forensic inspection. By the time outside attention arrived, any temporary trace could have disappeared, or there may never have been one. Ariel survives almost entirely as a case about human testimony. That makes the failure of early procedure devastating. If the pupils had been separated immediately, interviewed with open questions by trained child witness specialists, and asked to mark locations before discussing the event, investigators could have compared independent details. They could have recorded what each child saw, what each only heard from friends, and what emerged after adult questioning. Instead, the case developed in a school full of frightened children, anxious parents, curious reporters, and investigators already interested in UFOs. The absence of clean procedure leaves room for several explanations. A deliberate group hoax is possible, but coordinating dozens of younger and older pupils would have been difficult, and no persuasive organizer was identified in 1994. A shared misinterpretation is more plausible. One or several children notice something unusual, attach a dramatic label to it, and the label spreads faster than careful observation. A figure in the brush might have been a person, an animal, a reflective object, or something arranged as a prank. Later hypotheses have proposed everything from a dust devil to traveling puppets. None has produced decisive evidence. In 2023, a former pupil named Dallin said that he had triggered the event by pointing toward a shiny object and calling it a UFO. His account offered skeptics something close to a confession, but it came with its own problem. Earlier recorded comments attributed to him had described unusual lights rather than admitting a prank. His later explanation conflicts with both other witnesses and his younger self. It may expose the origin of the panic, or it may be another example of memory changing over decades. The adult witnesses make the case harder to close. Several have appeared in later documentaries and interviews, still insisting that the event happened. Some describe lifelong isolation, recurring fear, or frustration at being treated as either liars or proof of aliens. Their continued belief is meaningful, but longevity does not guarantee accuracy. Human beings can preserve mistaken memories for a lifetime, especially when those memories become tied to identity, community, and a public story. Nor does the failure to recant prove coordination was impossible. We do not have follow-up interviews with every child counted among the 62. Some pupils said they saw nothing. Others have remained silent. Public documentaries naturally select witnesses willing to speak, and stories dramatic enough to include. The phrase, "Not one has ever changed the story," is stronger than the available evidence allows. Yet, reducing Ariel to mass hysteria also explains less than it seems. Mass psychogenic illness usually refers to physical symptoms spreading through a group without an identified medical cause. At Ariel, the central evidence is a shared report, not an epidemic of fainting or illness. Social contagion, memory conformity, rumor, and collective misinterpretation are more precise possibilities. They can explain how narratives converge, but they do not tell us what first drew the children toward the field. That first stimulus remains the locked room at the center of the case. Perhaps it was a distant object catching sunlight after a week of aerial excitement. Perhaps older children staged something and lost control of the reaction. Perhaps several ordinary sights, a flash above the trees, a person near the brush, shadows moving in the heat, were fused into one extraordinary sequence. Or perhaps the witnesses encountered something not represented in the evidence available to us. The honest conclusion is not as satisfying as belief or dismissal. The children were not interviewed under the rigorous isolation often claimed. Their drawings were not identical. Mack did not scientifically prove they were telling the truth, and Harvard did not endorse an alien explanation. The ecological message came from only a portion of the testimony. There is no physical evidence capable of identifying a craft. But something happened at Ariel School. Dozens of children rushed back from the playground with a story that entered their lives and never completely left. Early footage records fear and confusion before decades of documentaries could fully polish the legend. Several adults still describe the same core images: an object near the trees, a dark figure, and overpowering eyes. The investigation was too compromised to prove the encounter, and the surviving testimony is too unusual to make the case disappear. That is why Ariel endures. It is not a perfect case for extraterrestrial contact. It is a perfect case for the danger of lost evidence. Within minutes, children began influencing children. Within days, reporters and UFO investigators shaped the archive. Within months, a famous psychiatrist introduced questions of consciousness and planetary warning. By the time the world looked closely, the original event and the story about the event had become impossible to separate. So, what do you think stood beyond that playground? An unknown visitor, a misunderstood object, or a story born inside a frightened crowd? And if you could recover only one missing piece, the first private statements, a photograph, or an adult eyewitness, which would you choose? Leave your answer in the comments, subscribe to the Shadow Ledger, and follow us into the next unresolved file. Some mysteries survive because evidence is hidden. This one survives because the evidence was never protected.